Batman has walked through fire, faced gods, and stared down death 1,000 times. For decades, Gotham's criminals learned the same lesson. You don't win against the Bat. He's faster, smarter, always 3 steps ahead. But one night, all of that ended. One man in a mask didn't just beat Batman. He broke his spine over his knee and left him in the gutter like trash, while Gotham watched its protector fall. The question isn't whether it happened. The question is how. How does anyone break the unbreakable? How do you destroy a legend who survived everything Gotham could throw at him? The answer doesn't start in Gotham. It starts in a place where men are buried alive long before they die. To understand that night, you have to go back to a prison that doesn't exist on any map. Peña Duro sits on the island of Santa Prisca, a forgotten scar in the Caribbean. Built centuries ago as a colonial fortress, it became something worse, a political dungeon where enemies of the state vanished forever. No trials, no records, no release dates. The locals stopped saying its name out loud. Families who lost someone to Peña Duro learned not to ask questions. The prison swallowed 3 generations of prisoners, and the only thing that came back were stories. Stories about the lower levels, about cells carved into rock below sea level, about things that happened in the dark. By the time the 20th century arrived, Peña Duro had a reputation that kept even hardened criminals awake at night. Inmates called it the pit. Guards called it hell. And in that darkness, a child was born who would never see daylight. His mother was a revolutionary, or married to one. The records don't agree. What's certain is that his father's crimes bought her a life sentence in Peña Duro, and when she arrived, she was pregnant. The warden didn't care. The sentence stood. She gave birth in a cell 6 feet wide, and for the first 6 years of his life, that cell was the boy's entire world. When she died, weak from fever and malnutrition, the guards didn't release him. They made him serve out her remaining years. A child, paying a debt he never owed, surrounded by murderers and cartel enforcers. He learned to read by watching other inmates scratch letters into stone. He learned to fight by watching men kill each other over food. By the time he was 8, he'd seen enough death to fill a graveyard, and he'd learned the prison's first law. Weakness is permission to die. But survival wasn't enough for him. He wanted to rule the very hell that tried to break him. The prison had a library. Most inmates couldn't read, and the ones who could didn't care. But Bane walked in at 9 years old and never left. He taught himself 6 languages from dictionaries with missing pages. He memorized strategy texts written by generals who'd never seen a battle like the pit. Philosophy, anatomy, military history. He turned his cell into a war college, while men twice his age gambled away their rations. By 12, he could quote Sun Tzu in Mandarin and recite the anatomical weak points of the human spine. The guards laughed at the kid with the books. The inmates who'd tried to take them from him stopped laughing after the first few. He wasn't just reading. He was building a blueprint for dominance, page by page, testing every theory against the concrete reality of prison violence. Where other boys saw stories, he saw weapons. And then the warden noticed the boy who was becoming something dangerous. Peña Duro wasn't just a prison, it was a laboratory. Santa Prisca's military regime had been developing a super soldier serum called Venom for years, and they needed test subjects no one would miss. Political prisoners, lifers, the forgotten, the kind of men whose deaths wouldn't make it past the prison walls. Bane was 15 when they dragged him to the medical wing. No trial, no consent, just a number on a clipboard and a table with restraints. The drug used a spinal injection system, tubes running directly into the vertebrae, pumping synthetic adrenaline and combat stimulants into the central nervous system. 37 subjects before him had died screaming. The scientists didn't even bother learning his name. They strapped him down, inserted the tubes, and started the drip. His body seized. Bones cracked as muscle mass expanded faster than tissue could adapt. Inmates 3 cells away heard him roar. They expected him to die like the others, but his body did something no one predicted. Venom floods the system with artificial strength. Lifts that would shatter vertebrae become possible. Pain receptors dull to the point where broken ribs feel like bruises. Speed doubles, endurance triples. But the cost is immediate. Without a constant supply, the body goes into catastrophic withdrawal. Muscle spasms, organ failure, hallucinations that make men claw their own faces off. Bane didn't just survive the initial dose. He adapted. His cardiovascular system regulated the flow. His pain tolerance, already forged in 15 years of the pit, made him functional even at the drug's lowest ebb. Where other subjects became slaves to the compound, thrashing animals who'd do anything for the next hit, Bane studied it, measured it, learned the rhythm of the dosage, the windows of clarity between injections. The warden had wanted a weapon. Instead, he'd created something with a will. The tubes became part of Bane's silhouette, a second skeleton grafted to the first. He walked out of that medical wing 80 pounds heavier, every ounce of it purposeful. And in that survival, he saw not a curse, but a weapon he could master. Peñaduro had a hierarchy older than most of its inmates. Gang leaders controlled cell blocks, enforcers collected tribute, and the guards knew which corridors to avoid after dark. Bane studied that architecture the way another man might study a chessboard. He started with the enforcers. 3 fights in 8 days, each one faster than the last. No theatrics, no speeches, just the hydraulic certainty of a man who'd learned pain as a language and now spoke it fluently. The gang leaders came next, one by one, until the prison's power structure had a single name at the top. Guards began requesting transfers. Inmates whispered his title in Spanish, then in English, then in silence when he passed. He was 25 years old and sovereign over 2,400 men in 11 acres of concrete. But ruling a hole in the ground wasn't the vision that kept him awake. The dream always started the same way: darkness, but not the kind you adjust to, the kind that presses in from all sides, humid and waiting, and then the wings. A creature born of shadow and leather, too large to be real, too specific to be random. It didn't chase him, it hunted him, methodical, patient, the way a predator moves when it knows the prey has nowhere left to run. Bane had mastered every fear the pit could manufacture: starvation, violence, the slow erosion of hope. But this thing, this bat demon that lived only in sleep, refused to be conquered. It was the single enemy he couldn't touch, couldn't break, couldn't understand. And then he heard the legend of the city the demon might be real in. Rumors traveled through Peñaduro the way contraband did, slow, distorted, but persistent. And in 1991, one rumor arrived with unusual consistency. A city in the north where a vigilante, dressed as a bat, dispensed justice from the rooftops. The stories varied. Some said he was 7 feet tall, others that he could fly. Inmates argued whether he was a man or something worse. But every version agreed on 3 details: Gotham City, midnight, and broken bones left in his wake. Bane collected every scrap of information, every overheard conversation, every second-hand account from transferred prisoners. The creature in his nightmares had a name now: Batman. It had a city. It had patterns, territories, a documented history of violence that read like a dark gospel. And he realized the only way to conquer his fear was to destroy its living embodiment. He didn't rush it. Bane spent months mapping the guard rotations, the tide schedules, the exact minute the supply boat idled at the dock with its engine warm. Escape from Peñaduro wasn't a burst of desperation. It was arithmetic, worked out in the dark. And he wouldn't go alone. He picked 3 men the way a surgeon picks tools. Bird, the smooth talker who knew people on the outside and could move money and muscle. Trog, built like a wall, loyal and immovable. And Zombie, the quiet one, with a mind for chemistry and demolition, useful when doors needed to stop being doors. When the moment came, they took it in blood and fire. Guards fell, alarms screamed, and the island that had swallowed Bane whole finally coughed him back up. He walked out over the bodies of men who'd once controlled his every breath. But freedom was only step 1. Now he had to reach the city where gods walked as men. Gotham welcomed him the way it welcomes everyone, which is to say, it didn't notice him at all. A giant of a man in a strange mask stepped off the boat into a city that had seen stranger, and nobody blinked. That anonymity was a gift, and Bane used every second of it. He didn't hit the streets swinging, he walked them. He studied the way the skyline crowded together downtown and thinned out toward the docks, how the old money stacked itself in one district while the desperation pooled in another. He learned which gangs ran which corners, who paid tribute to whom, where the seams in the underworld pulled tight. The man who'd been buried underground for decades now moved through Gotham like he'd been born to it, silent, patient, always in the frame no one was looking at. He listened in bars, watched deals go down, mapped the whole rotten machine in his head, and the more he watched, the more he saw that Gotham's protector had a weakness no one else had found. So he did what he'd always done best. He studied. Bane treated Batman like a case file, not a legend. He collected police reports, newspaper clippings, whispered accounts from criminals who'd survived a run-in and never stopped talking about it. Patterns emerged, the way they always do for a patient mind. He plotted where Batman appeared and when, noticed the response times shrank in certain neighborhoods and stretched in others. He tracked which crimes drew the cape out of the dark and which ones it let slide, and from that, he started sketching the shape of the man underneath. A protector, yes, but a finite one. One body, one city, one long night after another. It became a puzzle he turned over calmly, night after night, adding a piece here, testing a theory there. He wasn't hunting yet, he was understanding. But intelligence alone wouldn't break the bat. He needed to break the man first. Bruce Wayne had been Batman for over a decade by the time Bane arrived in Gotham. 10 years of broken bones and shattered minds, of pulling bodies from the Gotham River and stopping bombs with seconds to spare. He'd faced Joker 17 times. He'd watched Harvey Dent become Two-Face. He'd buried friends and mentors and kept going. By then, the myth had solidified into something bigger than the man. The GCPD had a bat signal on the roof. The underworld whispered his name like a curse. He'd trained 2 Robins, built a network of informants across 6 continents, and assembled a crime lab that could reconstruct a murder scene from a fiber sample. Gotham's greatest detective, the Dark Knight. He was at the peak of his power, operating with a precision that came from thousands of nights in the field. Every contingency planned, every weakness cataloged, every threat neutralized before it could metastasize. He'd become so good at being Batman that Bruce Wayne was just the mask he wore during the day, and beneath that armor of certainty, cracks were already forming. The nights were getting longer. 3 hours of sleep if he was lucky. Sometimes none at all. He'd patrol until dawn, spend the day running Wayne Enterprises, then suit up again before the sun set. His body was a catalog of old injuries that never quite healed right. Fractured ribs from Killer Croc, burn scars from Firefly, a knee that locked up in the cold. Alfred kept track of the dosages, painkillers before patrol, anti-inflammatories after, stimulants when he needed to stay sharp for 36 hours straight. Bruce told himself it was temporary, just until Gotham stabilized. But Gotham never stabilized. The Joker would break out. Someone new would rise. The cycle repeated and repeated and repeated. He was still winning every fight, still solving every case, but the margins were getting thinner, a second slower to dodge. A clue he almost missed. Moments where his focus slipped and he had to drag it back through sheer willpower. He was running on fumes and momentum, held together by discipline and the absolute refusal to stop. And Bane saw exactly what Batman himself refused to admit. Bane's plan was surgical. Phase 1 was exhaustion, a coordinated breakout that would flood Gotham's streets with every nightmare Batman had ever locked away. Not chaos for its own sake, but calculated pressure, forcing the Bat to fight on 12 fronts at once. Each villain a wound, each night a little more blood loss. Phase 2 was isolation. Separate Batman from his allies, his resources, his support network. Make him fight alone. Cut the lines of communication. Turn Gotham's infrastructure against him. Transform the city itself into a maze, with Batman trapped at the center, running in circles, while Bane watched from above. Phase 3 was the strike. Wait until Batman was broken down, physically depleted, mentally frayed. Wait until he'd burned through every reserve, every contingency, every ounce of strength. Then meet him face to face, in a place of Bane's choosing. Not as a villain trying to escape, or a madman playing games. As an executioner. And Phase 1 began with the opening of a door that should have stayed locked forever. At 11:47 p.m. on a Tuesday in October, every electronic lock in Arkham Asylum received the same override command. 237 cells opened in perfect synchronization. No alarms, no warnings, just the mechanical click of bolts sliding back and the creak of steel doors swinging wide. The Joker walked out first, still wearing his patient gown, laughing at the guards who didn't understand what was happening yet. Scarecrow followed 6 seconds later from the maximum security wing. Then Josh, then the Riddler, then Mad Hatter, then Poison Ivy from her climate-controlled vault. Within 4 minutes, the entire asylum was empty. 18 guards were dead, 31 were unconscious, and Gotham's worst nightmares were pouring through the front gates like water through a broken dam. The security footage showed them scattering in different directions, each one heading toward their own corner of the city with a sense of purpose that suggested they'd been expecting this. Gordon's dispatch lit up with reports from every district at once. Explosions in the Narrows, hostages at the museum, fire at the Botanical Gardens, bodies piling up in the East End. And Batman did exactly what Bane knew he would. Tried to stop them all at once. The first call came at 11:53, 6 minutes after the breakout. Zaz had taken a family hostage in their apartment in Old Gotham. Batman arrived at 12:09, fought him across 3 rooms, took a knife to the ribs, and had him unconscious by 12:14. He didn't have time to wait for the GCPD. The Batmobile screamed toward the museum where the Riddler had wired 40 hostages to a logic puzzle, each wrong answer triggering an explosive. Batman solved it in 11 minutes, 3 minutes faster than Riddler calculated, but he'd been awake for 19 hours, and his hands were shaking when he cut the last wire. Then Firefly at the docks, then Two-Face at the courthouse, then Calendar Man at City Hall. Each fight shorter than the last because he was cutting corners, taking hits he'd normally block, using pain as fuel when his body started failing. By 3 a.m., he'd stopped 9 villains, and his suit was torn in 4 places. His left shoulder was dislocated, and he'd cracked at least 2 ribs. Alfred's voice in his ear kept asking him to come back to the cave, to rest for an hour, to let Gordon's people handle the smaller threats. He ignored every word, but what he didn't know was that every fight was being watched, studied, cataloged. Scarecrow was waiting in the old Arkham North building, the one they'd condemned after the riot in '09. Batman found him in the basement surrounded by 6 canisters of concentrated fear toxin, each one rigged to a pressure trigger. He had maybe 30 seconds to make a choice, and Crane was already smiling behind his mask. The gas hit him before he could deploy the rebreather. His father's voice, his mother's scream, the alley, the gun, the pearls scattering across wet pavement. Then Jason Todd's laughter, then Dick falling, then Barbara's spine breaking again and again, in a loop he couldn't escape. He fought Scarecrow blind, swinging at shadows that weren't there, while the real Crane circled him with a scalpel. It took 8 minutes to subdue him. 8 minutes of fighting his own mind, while his body took cuts he should have seen coming. When the antidote finally kicked in, he was on his knees, in a pool of his own blood, and Crane was unconscious against the wall, with a broken jaw. He sat there for 40 seconds, just breathing, trying to separate what was real from what the toxin had shown him. His HUD was flashing warnings about blood loss and core temperature, and something about his heart rate that he didn't have time to read. And before he could even catch his breath, the Riddler's bombs started ticking across the city. Nigma had planted 14 devices across 6 city blocks, each one chained to a riddle, each riddle leading to the next. The first bomb was in a subway car with 40 commuters locked inside. Batman had 8 minutes to solve the cipher, trace the detonator signal, and disarm the trigger mechanism while GCPD tried to evacuate the tunnels above. He got it done with 90 seconds left. The second bomb was worse. It was wired into the heart monitor of a patient at Gotham General, set to detonate if the man's pulse dropped below 60 or spiked above 100. The riddle referenced a Shakespeare sonnet Batman had to cross-reference with a chess notation from a 1952 tournament while keeping the terrified patient calm enough that his heart wouldn't trigger the device. By the 9th bomb, Batman's hands were shaking so badly he had to steady his wrist against the wall to cut the right wire. His HUD kept dimming out. He'd been awake for 31 hours straight, and Edward Nigma's voice over the police band sounded like it was coming from underwater. He disarmed the last device at 4:17 a.m. in a kindergarten classroom, the timer frozen at 00:03. But rest wasn't coming. Poison Ivy had just seized Robinson Park, and hostages were already dying. The park had become something out of a nightmare inside 20 minutes. Vines thick as telephone poles had erupted through the pathways, dragging joggers and dog walkers into the canopy. Pamela had released 11 new spore variants into the air, each one targeting a different organ system. Batman burned through 4 antitoxin cartridges, just reaching the botanical garden at the park's center. The plants themselves had changed. They moved with purpose, coordinated, some of them sprouting limbs that looked almost human. He counted 23 civilians, cocooned in the trees, still breathing, but wrapped so tightly their ribs were cracking. Ivy stood in the ruins of the greenhouse, her skin more chlorophyll than flesh now, surrounded by flowers that screamed when he got close. The fight lasted 17 minutes. Batman used liquid nitrogen grenades to freeze the root systems, then herbicide charges he'd synthesized 6 months ago for exactly this scenario. Ivy went down hard, her mutated plants withering as she lost consciousness. But 9 of the hostages didn't make it. The spores had worked too fast, shutting down their lungs before the EMTs could intubate. Batman pulled the last body down from the trees himself, a kid maybe 19 years old, and had to set her on the grass because his arms gave out. And in the shadows, Bane watched Batman stumble for the first time. The Joker hit downtown at 6 a.m., right as the morning shift was flooding into offices and coffee shops. He'd rigged 8 city buses with explosives and filled them with hostages, wearing identical purple suits and clown makeup. Batman had 40 minutes to figure out which bus held real civilians and which ones were packed with mannequins and Joker venom canisters set to release on a timer. He chose wrong on the 3rd bus. It wasn't civilians, but the venom cloud still spread across 4 city blocks. and 160 people breathed it in before the wind shifted. Batman watched them laugh themselves into seizures, while the Joker's voice crackled over a hijacked speaker system, singing something that might have been a nursery rhyme. He found the real hostages on the 7th bus, wired to enough C4 to level a city block. The Joker was waiting on the roof of the Gotham Gazette building, surrounded by reporters he'd tied to office chairs and positioned like an audience. The fight was brutal and messy. Batman took a crowbar to the ribs, then a knife across his shoulder when his guard dropped for half a second. He felt something crack in his chest, and his HUD went red with warnings he couldn't read anymore because one eye had swollen shut. He got the Joker into custody at 7:43 a.m. The clown was still laughing when they loaded him into the GCPD van, and Batman couldn't tell if the ringing in his ears was from the concussion or the sound of Joker's voice echoing in his skull. But the Joker was only one monster. Zash was already carving his count into new victims across the Narrows. The Narrows had always been Gotham's forgotten quarter. 14 blocks of crumbling tenements where the streetlights stayed broken and the police stayed away. Zaj had chosen it for exactly that reason. He'd barricaded himself inside a condemned apartment building with 11 hostages, and every 20 minutes he carved another tally mark into his own skin, one for each person he planned to kill. Batman went through the 4th-floor window at 2:47 a.m. He moved room to room, pulling hostages out through fire escapes, while Zez stalked the hallways with a straight razor in each hand. The building was a maze of rotted walls and missing floorboards. Batman found 9 of them alive. The mother and her daughter in the basement stairwell had been dead for hours, Zash's count freshly carved beside them. Batman carried their bodies out himself because the GCPD wouldn't send a coroner into the Narrows until daylight, and by the time he dragged Zash's back to holding, Batman had been awake for 3 days straight. Garfield Linz didn't wait for nightfall. At 11 a.m. the next morning, 6 separate buildings ignited across Gotham, from the old Gotham Historic District to the waterfront warehouses near Amusement Mile. Firefly's signature accelerant burned at 1,800 degrees Fahrenheit, hot enough to melt steel beams in under 90 seconds. Batman worked the fires from east to west, following the flight path Linz carved through the smoke. He pulled a family of 4 from a collapsing brownstone in Robinson Park, dragged an unconscious security guard from a burning office tower downtown. The Batsuit's thermal shielding was rated to 30 minutes of exposure, but Linz kept him in the flames for 40. He finally cornered Firefly on a rooftop in Otisburg, tackled him mid-flight and shattered the jetpack's fuel line. The explosion left both of them on the ground, covered in burns. Linz laughed the whole way to the hospital wing at Blackgate, kept saying he'd already accomplished what he wanted. But while Gotham burned above, something worse was stirring in the tunnels below. Waylon Jones had always lived in Gotham's underbelly, 40 miles of storm drains and sewer tunnels that most of the city pretended didn't exist. But sanitation workers had been disappearing for a week, 7 men dragged into the dark and never seen again. The union threatened to strike. Gordon called Batman at dawn. The descent took 20 minutes through a maintenance shaft near Crime Alley. The water was chest-deep and black, lit only by the suit's helmet lamps. Batman found Croc 800 feet below street level, surrounded by gnawed bones and the remains of the workers' equipment. The fight lasted 11 minutes in waist-deep filth, every punch echoing through concrete tunnels built in 1889. Croc's claws opened 4 gashes across Batman's ribs, deep enough to see muscle. He dragged Batman under twice, held him down in water thick with things Batman didn't want to identify. Batman won by collapsing a support column, buried Croc under half a ton of rubble, and climbed out with his lungs full of sewage. And when he finally climbed back to the surface, 2 more Arkham inmates were already terrorizing the Diamond District. Jervis Tetch had converted the entire third floor of the Gotham Museum into a replica of Wonderland, complete with neural transmitters hidden in every teacup. 14 hostages walked in perfect circles, eyes glassy, repeating verses from Carol, while Tetch adjusted frequencies on a console built into the Mad Hatter's throne. Batman had to dismantle the network node by node, but Tetch kept sending the mind-controlled civilians to attack him. He couldn't hit back. Not hard. Every punch had to be measured. Every takedown soft enough not to break ribs on people who didn't know what they were doing. A security guard swung a fire axe at Batman's head with the coordination of a puppet on strings. Batman dodged, swept the man's legs, caught him before his skull hit marble. Tetch laughed from his throne, adjusted another dial, sent 4 more hostages shambling forward. It took Batman 37 minutes to reach the console and fry Tetch's equipment without killing the hostages still wired into it. When the GCPD arrived, Batman was holding a woman in her 60s who'd collapsed mid-step, her brain trying to reboot from whatever Tetch had pumped into it. He set her down gently, zip-tied Tetch to a marble column, and left through the skylight with 3 new bruises from people who'd never remember attacking him. But what Batman didn't realize was that every wound, every moment of hesitation, was being recorded and analyzed. Bane sat in a penthouse 11 blocks from Arkham, surrounded by monitors streaming every security camera Batman passed, every rooftop he crossed, every alley where he stopped to breathe. He'd been watching for 6 hours straight, a notepad in one hand and a stopwatch in the other. Response time from grapple to landing, 2.8 seconds, down from 2.4 at the start of the night. Right side favoring when turning, 11 degrees more than left, probable rib damage. Bane replayed the Killer Croc fight in slow motion, counted how many times Batman's left knee buckled under Croc's weight, noted the 1.3-second delay before Batman could raise his right arm after the column collapse. He cataloged which villains made Batman hesitate, which injuries made him compensate, exactly how long it took the Dark Knight to stand up after Zuz put him through drywall. Every fight was a data point. Every wound was a variable. He watched Batman limp across the museum's roof after the Mad Hatter, saw him stop at the edge to press a hand against his ribs before grappling to the next building. Bane wrote down the timestamp, circled it twice, cross-referenced it with the 4 other times Batman had paused in the same way. The pattern was emerging, not just fatigue, not just injury, and he saw the one pattern Batman couldn't hide, no matter how hard he tried. Batman returned to the Batcave at 3:47 a.m. with a dislocated shoulder and a gash across his back that had bled through the suit's padding. Alfred had the medical bay prepped before the Batmobile's engine cut off, sutures laid out in order of likely use. He reset the shoulder without a word, stitched 19 inches of torn skin, while Batman pulled up the GCPD dispatch feed with his good hand. 6 more incidents flagged: Scarface robbing a casino, Clayface loose in Old Gotham. Alfred suggested rest in the tone that meant it wasn't a suggestion. Batman was already standing, already reaching for a fresh cowl. The old one had Croc's teeth marks through the Kevlar, and something Alfred refused to identify smeared across the cape. Bruce moved like a man held together by spite and bandages. But Gotham was still burning, and there were still 8 Arkham inmates unaccounted for. Alfred handed him a syringe of adrenaline and antibiotics, watched him inject both without sitting down. The cave had become a triage station. Bloodied cowls hung on hooks like hunting trophies in reverse, 3 damaged suits waiting for repair. Alfred didn't have time to finish. Batman left at 4:02 a.m. with fresh stitches pulling against every movement, and the adrenaline already turning his vision sharp in that chemical way that meant he'd pay for it later. Alfred watched the Batmobile's taillights disappear up the tunnel, counted the suture kits he had left, wondered if he'd have enough. But even Alfred didn't know the worst injury wasn't something stitches could fix. By day 14, Batman's left hand had 3 fractured metacarpals that never got splinted. The ribs Killer Croc cracked were grinding with every breath, and the deep tissue damage from Bane's earlier encounter in the sewers had turned into a low-grade infection that made his right leg burn whenever he put weight on it. Alfred cataloged it all during the 90-second intervals Bruce allowed for field dressing. Vision blurring at the edges from sleep deprivation. Reaction time down by 0.4 seconds. A torn rotator cuff that made lifting his arm above shoulder height an act of pure spite. He was still moving, still winning, technically, because every villain went back to Arkham and every hostage went home breathing. But the wins were getting thinner, the margins tighter. He'd started relying on gadgets instead of grappling because his grip strength was failing. Started using smoke pellets to buy the 2 seconds he needed to brace himself before a fight. The body was eating itself to stay functional. Muscle tissue breaking down for energy. Adrenaline doing the work his CNS couldn't anymore. Willpower filling in where bone density and fast-twitch muscle used to be. Alfred ran the numbers quietly. At this rate, catastrophic failure in 72 hours, maybe less. And that's when Bane decided the gauntlet had done its work. Now came the isolation. The tip came through GCPD channels, anonymous but credible. A trafficking ring operating out of Bloodhaven, 6 missing kids, a warehouse address, and a 36-hour window before they moved the operation offshore. Gordon handed it to Batman, who handed it to Robin, because Tim Drake had built that city's underworld map in his head and could move through it faster than anyone. It was the right call, tactically. What Batman didn't know was that Bane had spent $47,000 bribing mid-level GCPD clerks to make sure that tip hit the right desk at the right time. The warehouse was real. The trafficking ring was real. The kids were even real. Bane wasn't bluffing. He was just playing 4 moves ahead. Tim left Gotham at 11 p.m. with full tactical support and a promise to check in every 6 hours. Bruce watched the Redbird disappear across the city line and felt the network tighten by one critical node. No backup on patrol, no second pair of eyes on the rooftops, no one to cover the east side while he handled downtown. He told himself it was 48 hours, manageable, fine. And before Bruce could call him back, Nightwing received a distress call from the Titans that couldn't wait. San Francisco was burning, or close enough. Trigon's cult had seized 4 city blocks, taken 200 hostages, and the Titans were down 2 members, with Raven compromised, and Starfire, containing a dimensional rift that would collapse the Bay Bridge if she moved. Dick Grayson got the call at 1:14 a.m., and Bruce told him to go, because you don't leave your team to die, and because Gotham had survived worse than a quiet week. Dick didn't want to leave. He'd seen the footage from the past 2 weeks, watched Bruce's gait stiffen and his recovery time stretch longer after every fight. But Bruce was still standing, still winning, and the Titans needed him now. So Dick left, with a promise to be back in 72 hours and a sick feeling in his gut that 72 hours might be too long. Bane had paid the cult's logistics coordinator $85,000 to move the operation forward by 11 days. Trigon's followers didn't know they were pawns, and the Titans didn't know the crisis was manufactured. They just knew people were dying, and Nightwing was the only one who could coordinate the extraction without losing half the hostages. And in a single night, Batman's network was cut to nothing but Alfred and shadows. Calendar Man went down in an alley behind the old Gotham Post building on March 14th, exactly where Bane's intel said he'd be waiting for Pi Day. Batman took 3 punches he should have slipped. His right knee buckled twice. Cornelius Stirk was hiding in the Bowery's underground, feeding on fear the way he always did. The fight lasted 11 minutes. Batman's timing was off by half a second on every block, and half a second is the difference between a broken rib and a bruise. The ventriloquist and Scarface were holed up in a Diamond District pawn shop, and by the time Batman dragged them both to the GCPD lockup, his left hand was shaking so badly he couldn't make a fist. Gordon saw it, didn't say a word. 32 villains in 3 months. Every bone bruise layered on top of the last one, every muscle too tired to recover before the next call came in. And when the last cell door finally locked, Batman let himself believe the worst was over. For 9 days, Gotham was quiet. No breakouts, no murders, no fires in the Narrows. The police scanner stayed mercifully silent after midnight, and for the first time in months, Batman returned to the cave before dawn. He told himself it was the natural rhythm of the city, that even Gotham's underworld needed time to regroup. He ran diagnostics on the Batmobile, restocked his belt, let Alfred bring him tea at the computer instead of coffee. Small concessions to exhaustion. On the 7th night, he slept for 6 hours straight, dreamless. On the 8th, he actually sat down for a meal. On the 9th, he stood in the cave and felt the weight in his chest ease just enough to take a full breath. The monitors showed nothing. The city held, and in that dangerous, seductive stillness, he made the mistake every soldier makes when the shooting stops. He thought the war was winding down. But in that moment of stillness, Bane was already at Wayne Manor's gates. They came at 2:47 a.m. on a moonless Tuesday, 8 men moving through the East Garden like they'd walked the grounds 100 times before, because they had, on paper, in blueprints stolen from the city planning office and the original Wayne family architectural archives. The perimeter sensors never tripped. Bane's tech specialist had been studying Wayne Manor's security grid for 6 weeks. Every camera angle, every motion detector, every pressure plate in the gravel paths. They moved in the blind spots, stepping only where the system couldn't see. Inside, they bypassed the main hall and the east wing entirely, cutting through the service corridors Alfred used for the wine cellar. 4 minutes to reach the study, 90 seconds to locate the clock. Bird, a mercenary out of Bloodhaven, had the mechanism bypassed before the grandfather chime finished its 3 a.m. sequence. The passage opened without a sound. Bane stood at the threshold, staring down into the dark, and smiled for the first time in 3 months. All the planning, all the patience, all the blood spent emptying Arkham and burning Batman down to nothing, and they knew exactly where the entrance to the Batcave was hidden. The Batcave had been breached exactly 3 times in its history. Once by Ra's al Ghul, once by the Court of Owls, once by Superman during a disagreement that nearly ended their friendship. Each time, Bruce had upgraded security, added fail-safes, layered the entrance with biometrics and pressure sensors, calibrated to his weight alone. Bane walked past all of it. He moved through the cave slowly, methodically, touching nothing but observing everything. The giant penny from the Cobblepot raid in '89, the mechanical T-Rex from Dinosaur Island, the Robin costume in the glass case, still torn where Jason Todd had died. He stopped at the Bat computer, studied the active case files scrolling across the screen. 47 open investigations, 12 ongoing surveillance operations, 6 separate contingency plans for Joker's next escape. Batman had been working until the moment he'd left to fight Firefly 90 minutes ago. Bane sat down in the chair, the leather still warm. He didn't touch the keyboard. He simply waited, hands folded, breathing slow and even through the mask. And when Bruce Wayne came down the stairs, he found a stranger sitting in his chair. Bruce stopped 3 steps from the bottom. His cowl was already up, cape torn from the Firefly fight, utility belt down to 4 smoke pellets, and a grapple gun with 11 feet of line left. Bane didn't move. He spoke first, voice calm, almost conversational. He explained the Arkham breakout in under 2 minutes, how he'd smuggled venom into the asylum through a corrupt orderly who thought he was running steroids for the guards, how he'd distributed it to 11 specific inmates, chosen for their unpredictability and their personal grudges. how he'd timed the explosions to occur during a shift change when the fewest guards were present. Every fight had been calculated. Zash to drain stamina, chasing him through 4 buildings. Riddler to fracture focus, with 19 clues that led nowhere. Poison Ivy to introduce toxins that would linger in the bloodstream for weeks. Scarecrow to ensure Batman stopped sleeping more than 90 minutes at a time. Bruce's jaw tightened. Bane tilted his head, watching the micro-expressions flicker across the exposed part of Batman's face. He listed the fights in order, recited the injuries, named the mistakes Batman had made on the 4th night when exhaustion started affecting his reaction time by 0.3 seconds. And then Bane stood, and Batman realized this wouldn't be like the others. Batman moved first, standard opening, a feint with the left to draw the guard high, then a knee strike to the liver at 340 pounds of force. Bane shifted 6 inches, let the knee pass, and caught Batman's wrist mid-recovery. He didn't counter, he just held it, testing the grip strength, then let go. Bruce pivoted, swept low, targeting the knee, the same joint he'd used to drop Killer Croc in '91 and Clayface in '94. Bane stepped over it, almost lazy, and backhanded him across the cave. Not hard, a reminder. Batman rolled, came up throwing batarangs at the mask's venom tubes. Bane caught 2 mid-air, dodged the 3rd by millimeters. Every technique Bruce tried, Bane had an answer. Pressure point strikes to the shoulder. Bane flexed, and the angle changed by 4 degrees, nullifying the nerve cluster. Grapple to create distance. Bane grabbed the line, yanked Batman back, slammed him into the Batmobile hard enough to dent the armor plating. It wasn't luck. It wasn't venom-fueled reflexes. Bane was reading him, predicting the combinations before Bruce threw them, shifting weight a half-second early. Because he had studied it, he'd watched Batman fight 40 times in 2 weeks. Bane's hand moved to the dial on his gauntlet. The hiss was immediate. Green liquid flooded the tubes running up his arms, across his shoulders, into the mask itself. His muscles swelled, not dramatically, not like a transformation, just enough. 2 inches across the chest, veins bulging against skin that was already scar tissue. Batman threw a palm strike to the solar plexus, 340 pounds of force, the kind that collapses lungs. Bane didn't flinch. He caught Bruce's wrist mid-retraction and squeezed until bone ground against bone. The venom had doubled his strength in 8 seconds. Every strike Bruce landed now felt like hitting concrete, and Batman realized, too late, that this wasn't just strength, it was intelligence-wielding strength. Bruce shifted to Krav Maga, targeting joints, going for the throat. Bane blocked with his forearm, absorbing the strike, then pivoted into a counter that forced Bruce back 3 steps. He tried a ninjutsu hold, the kind that uses leverage to drop someone twice your size. Bane twisted out of it before Bruce could lock the angle, as if he'd drilled the escape 100 times. Every style had a counter. Every tactical retreat Bane anticipated. He'd studied the footage, yes, but more than that, he'd understood it, learned the rhythm, the tells, the micro-adjustments Bruce made under fatigue. Bruce feinted left, went right. Bane was already there, landing a body shot that cracked ribs. But Batman had one advantage left. He knew the Batcave's terrain. Bruce rolled backward toward the platform edge, forcing Bane to follow into the narrow walkway above the underground river. The stone was slick here, uneven, stalactites hanging low enough to clip a tall man's shoulder. He vaulted onto a support beam, using the height to deliver a drop kick that should have sent Bane into the water 20 feet below. Bane caught his ankle, yanked him down, but Bruce twisted mid-fall and landed in a crouch near the equipment racks. He grabbed a grapnel cable, swung it toward a stalactite, trying to bring the formation down on Bane's head. The rock shattered, 90 pounds of limestone crashing toward the floor. Bane sidestepped, barely, and kept advancing. Bruce was using exhaustion as camouflage now, making Bane chase him through the dark corners where the floodlights didn't reach. And for a moment, it almost worked, until Bane did something no other villain had ever done. He grabbed a steel support column and simply pulled it free from its moorings. 900 pounds of reinforced metal, and Bane swung it like a crowbar. The walkway Batman was standing on folded inward, and suddenly, the high ground was gone. Computer banks became projectiles. The workstation where Bruce had analyzed 10,000 cases shattered against the cave wall 6 inches from his head. Bane wasn't just fighting in the Batcave. He was demolishing it, rewriting the geometry of the battlefield with his bare hands. Bruce tried to use the shadows, the same corners where he'd hidden from his parents' killers in his nightmares. But Bane had studied this place. He knew where the dark ended. He knew where Bruce would run. And when Batman lunged for what he thought was an opening, Bane's fist was already waiting. The punch landed clean on Batman's left side, right where the Riddler's trap had fractured 2 ribs 11 days earlier. The crack echoed off the cave walls like a gunshot. Bruce's gasp was involuntary, the kind of sound he'd trained himself never to make. He stumbled backward, one hand pressed against his chest, the other still trying to hold a defensive posture. But the pain was white-hot now, every breath a reminder that something inside him had just come apart. Bane saw it, saw the way Batman's stance had shifted, the way he was guarding that left side. And Bane pressed forward, not rushing, not wild. He moved like a surgeon who'd just made the first incision and knew exactly where to cut next. Batman tried to pivot, tried to create distance, but the cave was smaller now, the walls closer. But broken ribs weren't the message Bane had come to send. Bane's next 3 strikes targeted the shoulder Killer Croc had dislocated. The knee, Scarecrow's fear toxin, had made him wrench against a steel door. The orbital bone Zsasz had fractured with a pipe. He wasn't guessing. He'd watched the footage. He knew the medical reports Alfred had filed, the X-rays Bruce had hidden even from his own family. Each hit reopened something. The shoulder popped again with a wet sound. The knee buckled. Blood from the reopened cut above Bruce's eye ran into his vision, turning the cave red. This wasn't the wild fury of the Joker, or the theatrical cruelty of Scarecrow. It was systematic, clinical. Batman threw 4 more punches. 2 of them landed. Bane didn't flinch. He just kept coming, kept breaking, kept dismantling the man piece by piece. Bruce's breath was shallow now, each inhale like broken glass in his chest. And then Bane did what he'd told Batman he would do from the beginning. Bane reached down and grabbed Batman by the torso. He lifted him slowly, methodically, hoisting the broken vigilante over his head like a conquered prize. Bruce's arms hung limp, his legs useless. The venom coursing through Bane's system made the weight feel like nothing. Batman tried to move, tried to find some angle, some leverage. His training screamed at him to shift his weight, to break the hold, but his body wouldn't respond. Every nerve was fire. Every muscle had been torn past its limit. He hung there in Bane's grip, suspended above the cave floor, and for the first time in his war on crime, Bruce Wayne understood what it meant to be powerless. Bane held him there, not rushing, not gloating, just holding the weight, letting the moment settle. He'd studied this man for months, tracked every movement, every technique, every weakness. Now he held the result of all that preparation overhead, and the cave was silent except for Bruce's ragged breathing. And then Bane brought him down across his knee. The sound was sharp and final, a crack that echoed off the cave walls like a gunshot in an alley. Bruce's spine bent in a way the human body was never meant to bend, vertebrae compressing and fracturing under the force of Bane's knee. The pain was immediate, and absolute, a white-hot spike that shot through every nerve ending before going suddenly, terrifyingly numb. Bruce tried to scream but couldn't find the air. His legs didn't move. His arms spasmed once and then went still. He could feel his heartbeat, could feel the cold stone of the cave beneath him as Bane lowered him to the ground, but everything below his chest was gone. Not hurt, not broken, just absent, like his body ended at the ribcage and the rest belonged to someone else. Bane stood over him, watching. No victory speech, no monologue. He'd said everything he needed to say before the fight began. Now he just observed as Batman lay there on the floor of his own sanctuary, unable to stand, unable to move, barely able to breathe. The Dark Knight, reduced to a man who couldn't feel his own legs. And when it was done, Bane carried Batman's body out of the cave like a trophy. Bane emerged into Gotham in the middle of the day. He carried Batman through the streets of the city Bruce Wayne had spent a decade protecting, the broken vigilante draped across his arms like a casualty of war. People stopped. Pedestrians froze on sidewalks. Drivers slowed to stare through windshields at the impossible sight. Criminals watched from alleys and corners, the ones who'd spent years running from that silhouette, that shadow that dropped from rooftops and left them broken. Now the Bat was the broken one, his cowl still on, but his body limp, his cape dragging on the pavement. Some of them whispered, some of them laughed, most just stared in stunned silence at the myth made mortal. Bane walked slowly, deliberately, letting everyone see, letting the city understand that its protector was gone. Batman's head lolled against Bane's chest, his arms hanging loose, his legs bent at wrong angles. Citizens backed away, horror and disbelief written on their faces. The symbol that had terrified Gotham's underworld for years was now just a man in a costume, carried through the streets like a conquered king. And Bane left him in the one place where everyone would see what he'd done. Bane chose City Hall, not an alley, not the docks, not some forgotten corner of the Narrows. The marble steps where Gotham's mayors had stood for 200 years, where press conferences announced new hope and old corruption. He laid Batman's broken body across the top step, like an offering to a god that had stopped listening. It was 2:47 a.m. when the first patrol car arrived. The officers radioed it in 3 times before dispatch believed them. By 3:15, every news helicopter in the city was circling overhead, their spotlights turning the scene into a stage. The cape was torn, the cowl was cracked along the left temple. One gauntlet had come off entirely, revealing a human hand, pale and limp. Gotham had never seen Batman like this. Mortal, defeated, real. The message wasn't subtle. Your protector is broken. Your myth is dead. I did this, and nobody stopped me. And by the time the paramedics arrived, Bane had already vanished into the chaos he'd created. The first ambulance couldn't get through. Crowds had formed, thousands of people pouring out of apartments and bars, pushing past police barricades to see if it was real. 6 officers tried to hold the perimeter. By 4 a.m. there were 40, and it still wasn't enough. GCN went live at 3:52. Every channel followed within minutes. The footage looped for 11 hours straight. Batman's body on a stretcher, the cape dragging behind, medics cutting away armor to find the damage underneath. Witnesses gave conflicting reports. Some said his back was bent wrong. Others said they heard it snap from a block away. Commissioner Gordon arrived at 4:23, his face gray under the camera lights. He didn't take questions. The medical examiner's preliminary report landed at Gotham General by dawn. 3 fractured vertebrae, complete spinal cord disruption at L3, internal bleeding, 9 broken ribs, shattered left radius. The myth had survived gunshots, explosions, falls from skyscrapers. It had survived Joker, Scarecrow, Ra's al Ghul. It couldn't survive Bane. But the real damage wasn't to Bruce Wayne's spine. It was to Gotham's hope. The first pharmacy was looted at 5:18 a.m., 40 minutes after the news broke. By noon, 23 stores across 4 districts had been hit. Armed robbery calls jumped 340% in 12 hours. The GCPD logged 89 arsons in the first 48 hours, most of them in neighborhoods Batman used to patrol. Blackgate released a statement at 6 p.m. 14 guards had called in sick, and 3 wings were operating on skeleton crews. Arkham didn't release a statement. They didn't have to. The Joker's laughter echoed through the East Wing for 6 hours straight. Civilians fled. U-Haul rentals in Gotham tripled overnight. The bridges saw bumper-to-bumper traffic for 3 days as families packed what they could and left. Real estate agents stopped answering calls. Insurance companies started denying claims before they were filed. The criminals who'd spent years hiding from the Bat came out like roaches when the lights cut off. Two-Face held court in the Diamond District. Penguin's men moved weapons through the docks in broad daylight. Scarecrow's fear toxin showed up in 5 nightclubs in one weekend. And in the shadows, Bane watched the city devour itself like he knew it would. Alfred found the cave at 4:17 a.m. The computers were dark, the platforms shattered, and there was blood on the stone floor near the training ring. He'd seen Bruce injured before, dozens of times, but he'd never seen the cave destroyed like this. He called every hospital in Gotham. Mercy General had a John Doe admitted 6 hours earlier with severe spinal trauma. No ID, no insurance. The nurse wouldn't confirm the name, but Alfred heard it in her voice. He was already in the car. By the time he reached the ICU, Bruce had been through 2 surgeries. The doctors spoke in careful phrases about vertebral fractures and cord compression, about rehabilitation timelines and adaptive equipment. Alfred listened to every word and understood that they were preparing him for permanence. He sat beside the bed for 11 hours. Bruce's eyes were open, staring at the ceiling tile with the water stain in the corner. Alfred tried to speak twice and found he had nothing useful to say. But Bruce Wayne wasn't thinking about the cave. He was staring at legs that wouldn't move. The MRI showed 3 fractured vertebrae at L1, L2, and L3. The spinal cord hadn't been severed, but the damage was extensive enough that the neurologist used the word permanent in the first consultation. Motor function below the waist was gone. Sensation was inconsistent and fading. They scheduled a 3rd surgery to stabilize the spine with titanium rods. Bruce refused. He refused the pain medication too, refused the psychiatric evaluation, refused to sign the release forms that would have moved him to a long-term care facility. He just lay there, watching Gotham through the window. The orthopedic surgeon explained recovery in percentages and probabilities. Best case scenario, 18 months of intensive physical therapy for partial function. Worst case, a wheelchair for life. Bruce asked one question: how long until he could walk? The doctor hesitated too long before answering. Alfred brought clothes from the manor on day 4. The nurses brought adaptive equipment catalogs on day 7. Bruce looked at neither. He counted cracks in the ceiling and listened to sirens outside. 14 the first night, 29 the second, 41 the third. And while Bruce lay in a hospital bed, Bane was already building his kingdom on Gotham's ruins. Bane called a meeting at the stacked deck 3 days after nightfall. Every crew boss in Gotham got the invitation. 11 showed up. 2 tried to leave early. Their bodies were found in the Gotham River the next morning, and the remaining 9 suddenly became very cooperative. He didn't ask for loyalty. He demonstrated what happened without it. Penguin's weapons operation was absorbed in 48 hours. Scarecrow's chemists started cooking venom derivatives by the end of the week. The ventriloquist handed over his gambling network without a fight, and even Two-Face agreed to a temporary truce after seeing what Bane did to the Joker's abandoned hideout in Otisburg. Within 10 days, Bane controlled 60% of Gotham's underworld. The GCPD couldn't touch him because half the force was too scared to patrol after dark, and the other half was on his payroll. He ran Gotham like a military operation with supply lines, territorial divisions, and enforcement squads that moved with precision Batman would have respected. Crime actually dropped in some districts, not because Bane was merciful, but because chaos was inefficient. He wanted order, control, a city that ran on fear instead of anarchy. Gotham had never seen a criminal empire this organized, this ruthless, this unstoppable. But ruling Gotham was never really the point. Breaking the bat was the victory. Tim Drake flew back from Paris the moment he heard the third Robin had been training abroad when Gotham fell, and the flight felt endless. He landed to a city he barely recognized, police scanners screaming chaos, every news channel showing the same nightmare footage. When he reached the cave, he found wreckage. Computer monitors shattered, medical equipment scattered, blood on the stone floor. Bruce was alive, but barely conscious, his back shattered in 3 places, according to the preliminary scans Alfred had managed. Tim stared at the empty display case where the batsuit should have been. He reached for the spare suit in the armory. Alfred caught his wrist before his fingers touched the Kevlar, the old man's grip surprisingly firm. Tim was 17, fast, trained by the best. But he'd never faced anything like Bane, never fought someone who'd studied Batman for years, specifically to destroy him. Because what broke Batman wasn't something a younger, less experienced Robin could face. Dick Grayson arrived 6 hours later. The original Robin, now Nightwing, had been in Bloodhaven dealing with Blockbuster's crew when the news broke. He'd dropped everything, broken every speed limit between cities, and walked into Gotham General's secure wing with a face Alfred hadn't seen since the night his parents died. Bruce was awake when Dick entered, tubes running from both arms, spine immobilized in a halo brace. The doctors had said T12L1 complete fracture, spinal cord compromise, surgical fusion required. Dick heard percentages, recovery timelines, words like if and permanent. He sat beside the bed and didn't speak for 20 minutes. When Bruce finally talked, his voice was barely a whisper through the pain medication. "Don't go after him. Dick, promise me, don't go after Bane." Dick Grayson had spent 15 years following Batman's orders, trusting his mentor's judgment, even when it hurt. He held Bruce's hand and said nothing, which was answer enough. But before any of them could act, someone else stepped forward to claim the mantle. Jean-Paul Valley wasn't supposed to be the answer. The vigilante known as Azrael had a complicated history, a former assassin for the Order of St. Dumas who'd broken free of their programming. Bruce had been training him for 8 months, teaching him control, trying to redirect that violent precision into something closer to justice. Valley was obsessive, trained since childhood in combat systems most people had never heard of. He could take apart 6 armed men in 30 seconds without breaking a sweat. But there was something wound too tight in him, something Bruce had been carefully monitoring, a rage that the Azrael conditioning had never fully burned away. When Valley heard what happened, he came to Wayne Manor without being called. He stood in Bruce's study while Alfred tried to turn him away, and he made his case in under 2 minutes. Gotham needed a Batman. Dick was needed in Bloodhaven, Tim was too young, and Bruce was in a hospital bed. Valley was ready, trained, and most importantly, he was there. And Bruce, desperate and broken, made a decision he would come to regret. Jean-Paul Valley didn't inherit the cowl. He took it and remade it in his own image. The sleek, shadowed silhouette Bruce Wayne had perfected over years became something else entirely. Plated armor, reinforced gauntlets, edges sharp enough to draw blood, Valley wasn't interested in Bruce's careful dance between symbol and man. He added weapons Bruce would never touch. Wrist-mounted blades that extended with a flick. Shuriken launchers built into the gauntlets. A cape reinforced with wire that could be used as a weapon itself. This wasn't the Batman who left criminals tied up for the police. This was something that broke bones and didn't wait to see if they'd heal. Valley fought without mercy, without the restraint that had defined Batman for a decade. He didn't interrogate, he brutalized. He didn't disable, he destroyed. Criminals who faced him didn't walk away with bruises and a story. They walked away changed, if they walked away at all. The question of right and wrong became simpler in Valley's hands. You broke the law, you paid the price. Bruce had spent years proving that Batman could operate in darkness without becoming part of it. Valley erased that line in weeks, and Gotham, drowning in fear, didn't care that their new protector was willing to kill. The crime families learned fast. The new Batman didn't play by the old rules. When the ventriloquist tried to move weapons through the East End, Valley didn't just stop the shipment. He put 3 men in intensive care and left Scarface's wooden head nailed to a warehouse door. The message was clear. This city belongs to the Bat, and the Bat has teeth now. But it wasn't just the criminals who were afraid. Witnesses reported a Batman who moved too fast, hit too hard, who seemed to enjoy the violence in ways Bruce never had. A woman Valley saved from a mugging in Park Row later told police she was more terrified of her rescuer than the man with the knife. The old Batman disappeared into shadows. This one stood in them, armored and waiting. Valley's effectiveness was undeniable. Crime rates dropped 40% in his first month, but the methods were impossible to ignore. Gordon found himself looking at crime scene reports that read like war zones. Shattered ribs, compound fractures, internal bleeding. These weren't the careful, controlled takedowns Bruce specialized in. These were beatings, and every night, the new Batman pushed further, testing limits that Bruce had spent years establishing. Tim Drake watched from the shadows, horrified. Dick Grayson made calls from Bloodhaven, trying to reach someone who could stop this. But Valley was untouchable, driven by something deeper than duty. And when he finally confronted Bane, it wasn't justice he was after, it was vengeance. Bane was still in Gotham, confident in his victory, watching the city tear itself apart. He'd broken Batman, claimed the city, and now he waited for challengers. Valley didn't make him wait long. The armored figure that crashed through the skylight of Bane's temporary headquarters wasn't the detective Bane had faced weeks before. This was a weapon, pure and simple. The fight was vicious from the first exchange. No strategy, no careful measurement of opponents' weaknesses. Valley just attacked, relentless and brutal, using every blade and piece of armor Bruce would have considered excessive. Bane fought back with the same raw power that had shattered Bruce's spine, but Valley's armor absorbed blows that would have killed an unprotected man. He didn't dance around Bane's strength. He met it head-on and matched it with rage. For 8 minutes, they tore apart the warehouse. Bane's venom tubes ruptured under Valley's gauntlet blades. Valley's armor cracked under Bane's fists. This wasn't the intellectual chess match Bruce had been drawn into, move and countermove. This was 2 forces colliding until one gave way. And when Bane finally fell, unconscious and bleeding, Valley didn't stop. It took Gordon's entire SWAT team to pull him off. Gotham had its victory. The man who broke Batman was defeated, hauled off to Blackgate in chains, while cameras flashed and reporters shouted questions. Valley stood in his damaged armor, silent behind the cowl, and the city cheered. But defeating Bane didn't fix what was broken. It only revealed how much had changed. The GCPD found Bane in the wreckage of his own operation, his venom tubes severed, his strength draining by the minute. Without the chemical that made him unstoppable, he was just a man in a broken mask. They dragged him back to Blackgate in chains, his empire dismantled, his soldiers scattered. Commissioner Gordon watched the transport leave and felt no satisfaction. Bane had won the war that mattered. He'd proven Batman could be broken, that the symbol had a body, and that body could fail. The city was reclaimed, but the damage was permanent. In his cell, Bane sat in silence. He'd lost Gotham, lost his army, lost his grip on the underworld he'd conquered. But he'd accomplished what no villain before him had managed. He'd taken the bat and snapped him in half. And in a hospital bed, Bruce Wayne faced the question Bane had forced him to answer. The doctors were clear: 3 fractured vertebrae, extensive nerve damage, a spinal injury that should have left him paralyzed for life. They talked about wheelchairs and adaptive equipment, about acceptance and realistic expectations. Bruce didn't hear any of it. Physical therapy became a battlefield. Every movement was agony. Every exercise a negotiation with a body that refused to cooperate. His therapists pushed him to manage his condition. He pushed back to erase it. The question wasn't whether Batman could exist in a broken body. It was whether Bruce Wayne could exist without him. Alfred watched him fight through sessions that left him shaking, sweating, silent with pain. There was no logic to it, no medical precedent for what Bruce was attempting. Just will, compressed into something harder than bone. The symbol had always been more than the man. Now the man had to prove he was more than the injury. And slowly, impossibly, something everyone said was permanent began to change. 5 months. That's how long it took Bruce Wayne to walk without assistance, to move without wincing, to stand upright in a body that medical science said would never fully recover. He trained in silence, pushing past thresholds that should have been impossible. No one called it a miracle. Miracles don't require 18-hour days and a refusal to accept reality. He rebuilt himself the way he'd built Batman, one agonizing piece at a time. Strength returned in increments measured in ounces, flexibility in millimeters. His spine fused differently. His movement changed, but the body worked. It bent without breaking. Alfred brought him reports from the city, but Bruce barely listened. All that mattered was reclaiming what Bane had taken: the cowl, the mission, the control. He ran the cave's training simulations until his muscles remembered what his nerves had forgotten. He climbed, he fought. He proved to himself that Batman could still exist. But while his body healed, the man wearing his cowl was spiraling into something darker. The recovery wasn't dramatic. No montage, no sudden breakthrough. Just weeks that became months. Physical therapy that left him sweating and shaking. Relearning balance on legs that had held Gotham's weight for years. Dr. Chandra Kinsolving worked miracles with his spine. But the real work happened in those quiet hours when Bruce pushed himself through exercises that would have broken most men. He studied Valley's patrols from the cave's monitors, watched the new Batman move through Gotham with a brutality that made his jaw tighten. Every night he asked himself the same question: could he come back from this? Not just physically. Could Batman exist again after Bane proved he was breakable? Alfred brought meals he barely touched. Tim sent reports he read 3 times each. Dick called every other day with updates that always ended the same way. Valley's getting worse. The bone had healed. The muscle was rebuilding. But some fractures run deeper than X-rays can show. Still, he kept training, kept pushing, because Gotham needed an answer to what Bane had done, and Jean-Paul Valley wasn't it. But while Bruce heals in secret, Gotham is learning what happens when the wrong man wears the cowl. Valley's first month was textbook. Stopping muggings, intercepting drug shipments, maintaining the fear. But the system whispered louder each night. Ancient programming, designed to create the perfect warrior assassin, not a guardian. And Jean-Paul Valley had never been trained to resist it. The brutality escalated in increments. A broken arm became a shattered knee. Intimidation became excessive force. The criminals he caught required longer hospital stays. GCPD, started filing reports with language they'd never used for Batman. Suspect claims torture, injuries inconsistent with apprehension, use of lethal adjacent force. He redesigned the suit, adding blades and armor plating, turning the Batsuit into something closer to a weapon system than a symbol. The new cowl had no room for Bruce Wayne's humanity, just steel and rage and the system's cold logic. When Abattoir dangled a hostage over a pit, Valley watched him fall. Didn't even reach. Gordon stopped turning on the signal, not because crime had stopped, but because he wasn't sure anymore what would answer. The suit was still black and gray, the symbol still a bat. But the man inside had crossed a line Bruce Wayne spent 10 years refusing to approach. And the city, that once feared the bat, now fears something darker wearing his symbol. Dick Grayson watched from Bloodhaven, monitoring police scanners, and calling in favors with cops who still trusted the Cape. Every report made his stomach tighten. Tim Drake ran interference in Gotham itself, tracking Valley's patrols, documenting the escalation, compiling evidence neither of them wanted to believe. They met in the cave when Valley was out, reviewing footage of the new Batman slamming a carjacker's head into pavement 4 times after he'd surrendered. Dick's hands curled into fists. Tim just kept taking notes, his jaw set in that way that meant he was barely holding it together. Alfred served coffee no one drank. The question hung between them every night. When do we intervene? Valley was still stopping crime, still protecting people, even if his methods had turned savage. Bruce was still healing, still weeks away from even considering patrol. And Gotham needed a Batman, even a broken one, didn't it? Dick started suiting up in Nightwing blue, shadowing Valley's routes, ready to step in if it went too far. Tim upgraded the cave's monitoring systems, tracking every move, every escalation, building the case they all knew was coming. They were loyal to Bruce, but they wore the symbol too, and that symbol meant something. What they don't yet know is that Bruce has already made his decision. Bruce makes his choice in silence, sitting in the Manor's empty study, with his spine still stiff and his hands still remembering the weight of paralysis. The doctors cleared him 3 weeks ago. His body is functional again, bone knit and nerve pathways restored, but functional isn't the same as ready. Alfred brings him tea and doesn't ask the question. He doesn't need to. Bruce has been testing himself in secret, late at night in the training room beneath the estate, pushing through exercises that leave him gasping and frustrated. He can walk, he can lift, he can't do what he used to do. The rational answer is no. Bane proved that Bruce Wayne's body has limits, that the mythology of Batman is more fragile than anyone believed. A smarter man would accept the loss, mentor the replacement, let the city move on. But Bruce Wayne has never been a rational man when it comes to the cowl. He makes the call to Barbara. No explanation, just a single instruction. Tell the others he's coming back. Not when, not how, just that the decision is made. But first, he needs to take back his symbol from the man wearing it. Lady Shiva meets him in Hong Kong, in a dojo above a noodle shop where the walls still carry scorch marks from a fire 12 years old. She's heard about the broken back, the replacement, the fall. When Bruce asks her to train him, she laughs once, short and cold. She agrees on one condition. He trains as a student, not as Batman. No gadgets, no armor, no reputation. Just a man who needs to remember how to survive a real fight. The first sparring session lasts 90 seconds before she drops him to the mat with a nerve strike that leaves his left arm numb for an hour. For 6 weeks, she rebuilds him, stripping away every compensatory habit his body developed to protect the injury. She breaks his guard 47 times in the first week alone. Every mistake costs him bruises, dislocations, humiliation. She doesn't comfort him when he lies on the floor, struggling to breathe. She waits, silent, until he stands again. The training is as much psychological as physical. Shiva makes him fight blindfolded, exhausted, injured, forces him to operate past the point where his mind screams that his body will fail again. Slowly, the fear response fades. His spine holds. His confidence rebuilds, sharper and colder than before. And when the training ends, Shiva tells him something he wasn't expecting to hear. She tells him Jean-Paul Valley won't surrender willingly, that the new Batman has tasted the power of the cowl and it's changed him, twisted the mission into something Bruce won't recognize. She's right. When Bruce returns to Gotham and descends into the Batcave for the first time in 4 months, Valley is waiting in full armor, standing beside the computer like he owns it. Bruce asks him once, "Step down, relinquish the mantle." Valley's answer comes in silence, then movement. He doesn't take off the cowl, he attacks. The fight that follows is confined and vicious. 2 men in a cave, lit only by monitor glow, crashing through workstations and armory racks. Valley fights with the armor's enhancements, flamethrowers and wrist blades Bruce never authorized. Bruce fights with everything Shiva taught him, every dirty tactic, every nerve cluster. It takes 11 minutes for Bruce to gain the upper hand. He doesn't knock Valley out. He pins him against the cave wall, one forearm across his throat, and rips the cowl off manually. Valley's face underneath is pale, feverish, pupils dilated. The armor's conditioning protocols have been running too long. He's been Batman for so many consecutive nights, he's forgotten how to be anyone else. Bruce makes him say it. "Say you're done." Valley resists, then breaks, collapsing forward when Bruce releases him. The cowl stays on the ground between them, empty and silent. Bruce picks it up slowly, feeling its weight again for the first time since Bane. What happens next will determine whether Gotham gets its true protector back. The fight doesn't last long. Bruce doesn't meet Valley head-on, doesn't try to outmuscle the armored suit or match its firepower. He uses the cave itself, the darkness Valley never learned to read, the terrain Bruce mapped as a child. He cuts power to the armor's targeting systems, trips servo cables with batarangs, leads Valley into narrow passages where the bulky suit can't maneuver. Every move is surgical, efficient, the product of 1,000 nights in this exact environment. When Valley finally goes down, pinned under a stalactite, Bruce collapsed with a shaped charge. The armor's glowing eyes flicker and die. Bruce stands over him, pulls the cowl from Valley's head, and speaks 4 words. "You're done in Gotham." Valley leaves the cave on foot. No suit, no mission. Exiled from the only purpose he'd ever known. Bruce watches him go, then turns back to the costume on the stone floor. The real Batman is back. But one question still hangs over the city, unresolved and inescapable. Bane isn't in Gotham anymore. After Azrael beat him in the streets, after his entire operation collapsed in 72 hours, he vanished. No dramatic exit, no final monologue. He just left. The man who walked into Gotham with an army walks out alone. His lieutenants are in Blackgate, his venom supply confiscated, his reputation as the unbeatable tactician shattered by a replacement Batman in a metal suit. Everything he built, gone. He drifts through Europe, South America, back to the Caribbean, works as muscle for hire, takes jobs beneath his skill level, avoids anything that might draw attention. The mask stays in a duffel bag. The venom stays untouched. Some say he's planning a return. Others say he's given up, that breaking the bat was the one perfect moment of his life, and everything after is just epilogue. The truth is, nobody knows where he is or what he's thinking. And the question everyone's asking, will he ever come back? Bruce Wayne is Batman again, full-time, no caveats, no substitutes. He patrols every night, rebuilds the network Valley burned, reestablishes trust with Gordon and the GCPD. On paper, everything's back to normal. But Gotham remembers. The criminals remember seeing Batman fall, seeing his back break on television, seeing a different man in the cowl for months. The mystique cracked. The illusion of invincibility died in that sewer tunnel. Bruce feels it too. The break healed, the body recovered, but something changed. He moves differently now, fights more cautiously, checks his back more often. He knows what it's like to lose, to be broken, to watch someone else wear the symbol he built. And Bane's still out there, not in Gotham, not yet, but alive. The man who did what no one else could, who found the one way to truly defeat Batman. Exiled, but not erased. The story didn't end with Bruce reclaiming the cowl. It just paused. So when Bane eventually returns to Gotham, the city holds its breath. When Bane walks back into Gotham 3 years after nightfall, he's a different kind of threat. No venom coursing through his veins, no army at his back. Just the man himself, sharper and colder than before. He's been wandering, dismantling cartels in South America, erasing the Santa Prisca legacy, one operation at a time. But Gotham pulls him back, because the city represents the one thing he's never truly settled. His defining victory became someone else's comeback story. This time, there's no manifesto, no declaration of war. He moves through the city like a ghost, testing old haunts, observing how Bruce rebuilt what he broke. The bat signal catches his attention one night from a rooftop in the Narrows. Word reaches the cave within hours. Alfred delivers it over tea. The way you'd mention an old creditor has returned to town. And this time, Bruce Wayne knows exactly who he's facing. The rematch happens on neutral ground, an abandoned subway station beneath Robinson Park. No exhaustion from 3 months of nonstop patrols. No element of surprise. Just two men who've spent years thinking about this moment. Bane moves first with that same calculated precision, testing Bruce's rebuilt spine with strikes designed to exploit old fracture points. But Bruce has spent 1,095 nights preparing for exactly this combination. He counters, absorbs, redirects. The fight lasts 11 minutes. Bruce wins decisively, a knockout that leaves Bane conscious but immobilized against a support pillar. No speeches, no gloating, just the sound of their breathing echoing off tile. Bane looks up and nods once before the GCPD arrives. The gesture says everything that needs saying. Bruce turns and disappears into the tunnels. But winning the fight doesn't erase what Bane accomplished. In Blackgate, Bane requests a single visitor. Bruce comes in civilian clothes on a Tuesday morning when the press isn't watching. They sit across bulletproof glass for 40 minutes, no recording devices permitted. Bane talks about Santa Prisca, about building intellect in a place designed to crush it. Bruce talks about the training, the journey back from a broken spine. Neither apologizes. Neither needs to. What forms between them isn't friendship or forgiveness. It's the recognition that only happens between people who've pushed each other past every limit. Bane respects the resilience it took to return. Bruce acknowledges the strategic genius it took to break him in the first place. When Bruce leaves, Bane watches him through the glass until he's gone. For the first time since childhood, the man who broke the bat understands he was never fighting a symbol or a crusade. He was fighting someone just as driven, just as unbreakable. And that recognition changes how Bane sees his own story. Bane walks away from Gotham and tries to become something else. He joins the Secret Six, Gail Simone's band of mercenary outcasts, and for a while, he's almost heroic. He protects children, refuses contracts that cross certain lines, even tries to kick the venom entirely. It doesn't last. He relapses, returns to mercenary work, gets dragged back into Gotham's orbit again and again. He works with Batman during Blackest Night, fights beside him in Leviathan, then turns on him 6 months later, when the next job pays better. The pattern repeats across a dozen storylines. Writers can't decide what Bane is anymore. Sometimes he's a calculating tactician, sometimes a roided-up brute, sometimes a philosophical warrior poet quoting Santa Prisca folktales. The New 52 reboot erases his Nightfall history entirely, then reinstates it 3 years later when readers complain. Rebirth softens him, then Future State makes him Gotham's warlord again. He becomes a father figure to a girl named Scandal Savage, genuinely tender in a way that surprises even him. Then he murders her girlfriend's family in a rival storyline because continuity doesn't care about character arcs. But no matter how far he travels, one truth never changes. Every iteration of Batman returns to the break. Tom King's run, Scott Snyder's Court of Owls, James Tynion's Joker War all reference Nightfall as the dividing line. The moment Batman learned he could lose. The animated series adapts it. The Arkham games adapt it. The Dark Knight Rises builds its entire third act around it. Bane appears in 37 different Batman titles between 1993 and 2023, and every single one mentions the spine. Writers who weren't born when Nightfall published still open their Bane scripts with "The man who broke the bat." It's his epitaph, his resume, the only thing Gotham will ever remember. Joker killed Jason Todd. Riddler has outsmarted Batman dozens of times. Ra's al Ghul knows his identity and commands a global empire. But only Bane gets introduced with, he's the one who actually beat him. Because he didn't just win a fight, he proved the mission could fail, that the symbol could shatter, that Bruce Wayne was mortal. The victory becomes myth. By 2010, casual fans who never read Nightfall still know Bane broke Batman's back. It's referenced in cartoons, memes, think pieces about superhero vulnerability, and that victory reshaped not just Batman, but the entire mythology around him. Bruce never talks about it, but the break is there in every major story that follows. When No Man's Land hits and Gotham collapses, he remembers what happens when he spreads himself too thin. When the Joker launches Endgame, he remembers what it feels like to lose control of the city. The trauma doesn't heal, it calcifies. Writers code it into his body language. He favors his left side in fight choreography. He takes an extra second getting out of the Batmobile. During Hush, when his skull gets fractured, Alfred mentions the back injury was worse. During R.I.P., when Dr. Hurt breaks him psychologically, the narration flashes back to the wheelchair, the helplessness, the sound of his own spine snapping. It's the wound that won't close. Other injuries fade. Other defeats get avenged cleanly. But Nightfall leaves him with a permanent awareness that the mission can end, that his body will eventually give out, that there's a limit he can't train past. He starts contingency planning obsessively. He starts testing successors. He starts building fail-safes for the day Gotham needs a Batman and Bruce Wayne can't be him anymore. The break becomes the reason for everything that comes after. The reason he takes on Robins. The reason he founds the Bat family. The reason he can't ever fully trust his own durability again. It's the reason he does what comes next. Bruce comes back different, not just physically, though the rehab takes months. He comes back calculating. Every patrol route now has 3 exits. Every ally gets a dossier of weaknesses. Every tool in the cave gets a backup, and the backup gets a backup. The contingency planning becomes obsessive. Tower of Babel, the protocols that nearly destroy the Justice League, those start here. The Insider Suit, designed to counter every meta-human threat, including Superman. That's Nightfall logic. Bruce doesn't just prepare for failure anymore. He architectures around it. He starts training successors with a new question in mind. Not can they fight, not are they smart enough. Can they hold Gotham if he goes down? Can they survive 3 months of siege, of Arkham emptied, of a tactician who studies you while you bleed? Every Robin after Tim gets tested against scenarios Bane invented. The Bat family stops being a partnership and starts becoming a continuity plan. Dick isn't just the first Robin anymore. He's the designated survivor. Battle for the cowl, the entire infrastructure for a Batman transition. Bruce builds that framework in the years after his spine heals. But all the planning in the world can't prepare Gotham for what's still coming. Nightfall forces the question Bruce spent 10 years avoiding. When the Batman falls, who carries it forward? Not who deserves it, not who's skilled enough. Who can hold the weight when Gotham is burning and every villain knows the Bat is vulnerable? Dick Grayson becomes the answer, but only after Bruce watches Jean-Paul fail. Tim Drake gets evaluated not on detective work, but on whether he'd break under Bane's boot. Damian, when he arrives, gets the hardest test of all, because Bruce has seen what happens when you give the cowl to someone who wasn't ready. The entire Bat family structure changes after Nightfall. It's not mentorship anymore, it's triage planning. Who leads if Bruce is gone for a week, a month, forever? Oracle becomes the nerve center, because Bruce learned you need intelligence running, even when the symbol is down. Batgirl, the second one, Cassandra, she's recruited specifically because she's unkillable in ways Bruce isn't. Every Robin after Nightfall is a stress test. Can you hold the line when 8 supervillains coordinate? Can you survive psychological warfare from someone who spent 6 months learning your patterns? Can you do it alone? Because backup might not come. And the standard is simple. Could they survive what Bruce barely did? Jean-Paul Valley doesn't get a clean ending. After Bruce takes the cowl back, Azrael tries to find a path forward, tries to be a hero without the system conditioning, without the armor, without the rage that made him brutal enough to hold Gotham during the siege. It doesn't work. The system keeps surfacing. He hears the voices in combat, feels the programming override his choices. He tries being Azrael again, the avenging angel instead of the Bat. But Gotham doesn't forget what he became. Criminals see him and remember the version that broke bones for minor theft, that let fear do the work. Brutality started. Bruce tries to help, offers training, resources, a place in the family. But Jean-Paul can't accept it. He was Batman for 6 months, held the city when it was dying, and proved he wasn't strong enough to do it right. That knowledge hollows him out. He takes missions that get darker, more desperate, chasing a redemption that stays out of reach. He dies a hero, eventually, saves lives, goes out fighting. But the real tragedy is simpler. He was chosen to replace Batman at the worst possible moment, succeeded just enough to break himself trying, and spent the rest of his life knowing he failed the one test that mattered. His story is the clearest warning of what the mantle costs. Tim Drake was 15 when Nightfall began. He'd been Robin for less than a year, still learning the basics, still proving he belonged in the cape. Then Bruce went down, Azrael went rogue, and suddenly the kid was the only functional member of the Bat family left standing. He kept patrol routes running. He coordinated with Gordon when Valley stopped answering calls. He tracked down leads Bruce had left unfinished, tried to keep tabs on Azrael's increasingly violent methods, and spent his nights wondering if he should call Dick, call Oracle, call anyone who could actually stop what was happening. By the time Bruce came back and reclaimed the cowl, Tim had aged 3 years in 6 months. He'd seen both his mentors break under the weight of the mantle in different ways. He'd learned you could do everything right and still watch Gotham burn. That education shaped the detective he'd become, the strategist, the one who always had 12 contingencies ready, because he remembered the night none of them were enough. Nightfall didn't just change Batman. It forged the Robin, who would eventually walk away from the name entirely, who would become Red Robin on his own terms, who would never fully trust that anyone, even Bruce, was truly unbreakable. And Nightwing carries his own scars from watching Bruce fall. Dick Grayson wasn't in Gotham when Bane broke Bruce's back. He was in Bloodhaven, building his own identity as Nightwing, finally out from under the shadow of the cowl. He got the call after it was already over. By the time he arrived, Bruce had already chosen Valley. That choice haunted Dick for years. Not because he wanted the mantle at the time. He'd spent his entire adult life trying to escape it, but because Bruce didn't even ask, didn't consider him, picked a near stranger with a messiah complex over the son he'd raised, trained, trusted for over a decade. The message was clear: you left, so you don't get to come back when it matters. Dick watched Azrael's descent from the outside, saw the violence escalate, the brutal methods, the armor that turned Batman into something Gotham didn't recognize. He helped Bruce through the recovery, through the physical therapy, through the psychological gauntlet of building himself back up to reclaim what Valley had corrupted. And when Bruce finally asked him, years later, to take the cowl after Final Crisis, Dick said yes, not because he wanted it, because he'd seen what happens when you give it to someone who does. Nightfall taught Dick that the mantle isn't a promotion or a legacy gift. It's a trap that requires someone strong enough to wear it without being consumed, someone who doesn't need it to feel whole. He became the best Batman Bruce never was, precisely because he remembered how badly it could go wrong, because he learned the lesson Bane taught: the cowl doesn't make you invincible. Gotham remembers Nightfall the way a body remembers trauma. The nights Batman disappeared, the weeks when a golden nightmare wore his symbol and left criminals broken in ways the real Batman never did. The power vacuum that followed when even the criminals didn't know what rules applied anymore. The mob wars that erupted after Azrael's fall killed 47 people in 3 weeks. Black Mask, the ventriloquist, and a dozen smaller operators fought over territories Batman used to patrol, streets he used to keep quiet. Gordon doubled shifts, instituted a curfew in the Narrows, and watched his officers get picked off because the bat signal didn't bring help anymore, at least not help anyone trusted. Citizens who'd believed in Batman's invincibility, who'd hung their safety on the idea that he would always be there, always win, stopped believing. Some moved out of the city. Others bought guns, formed neighborhood watches, put bars on windows that hadn't needed them before. The mythology cracked, and what seeped through the cracks was doubt. If Batman could fall, if someone could break him, then what exactly was protecting Gotham? What happened the next time a villain decided to test the myth? By the time Bruce reclaimed the cowl, the damage was done. He could be Batman again, could patrol the rooftops and stop the crimes and maintain the legend. But the city remembered. It remembered the night the bat broke, and that memory changed the relationship forever. Gotham still needed Batman, still called for him in the dark, but it no longer believed he was untouchable. And neither did he. But memory is one thing. What Nightfall changed about Batman's myth is something else entirely. What Bane truly broke wasn't Bruce's spine, it was the myth. For years, Batman's greatest weapon wasn't his gadgets or his training. It was the certainty in every criminal's mind that he couldn't lose. The Joker tested him. Ra's al Ghul challenged him. But even they operated under one unspoken rule: Batman endures. Bane shattered that. He proved the Batman could be beaten, could be broken, could fail so completely that Gotham burned for months while he watched from a wheelchair. The illusion of inevitability died on those stone steps in the sewers. Every villain who came after knew what the Joker and Two-Face and Riddler never truly believed: you can win. Scarecrow's fear toxins got deadlier. Hush's plans grew bolder. Even small-time thugs started thinking maybe, just maybe, tonight's the night the bat doesn't get back up. The psychological advantage Batman built over a decade evaporated in one night. Bane didn't just defeat a man. He killed the idea that Batman was unstoppable. And that knowledge ripples through every major Batman story that follows. When the earthquake hits years later, Gotham doesn't just crack open. It collapses inward, bridges falling, buildings crumbling, entire neighborhoods swallowed. The federal government declares it unsalvageable and walls it off. No man's land. 3 months of aftershocks, then silence from outside. Just Gotham, alone in the dark. Bruce tries. He suits up, he patrols, he saves who he can. But the scale is too vast. Gangs carve the ruins into territories. The Joker claims City Hall. Penguin controls the old Gotham district. Even with Oracle coordinating and the Bat family scattered across zones, there aren't enough hours in the night. People die waiting for rescue that never comes. It's nightfall again, stretched across months instead of weeks. Another citywide catastrophe. Another test of whether one man's will can hold back entropy. Another failure that asks if Batman even matters when Gotham's problems exceed what any symbol can solve. The cracks in the cowl show wider now. But Bane's lesson already taught Bruce the answer. Stephanie Brown just wanted to prove herself. Robin for 71 days. Eager, reckless, desperate to earn Bruce's approval. When he fires her, she steals one of his contingency plans. War games, a theoretical scenario for uniting Gotham's gangs under his control. She thinks she can execute it, show him she's ready. She triggers it instead. Every gang in Gotham goes to war at once. Black Mask seizes the chaos. Orpheus dies in the first hours, and the streets run red for weeks. Stephanie realizes too late she started something she can't stop. She's tortured, left to die in a clinic that explodes. 15 years old, Batman arrives too late, holds her body, and the city keeps burning behind him. The structure mirrors Nightfall beat for beat. Batman's own plans weaponized against him. Gotham collapsing into gang war. An ally dying because he wasn't fast enough, wasn't there, couldn't save them. Azrael's madness, Stephanie's death, the same guilt refracted through different failures. Bane's shadow stretches long. And it repeats again when Bruce himself dies. 2009. Bruce Wayne dies, or appears to, lost in time after Darkseid's Omega Sanction. And the question Nightfall asked in 1993 erupts again, louder. Who wears the cowl? Jason Todd returns from the dead, brutal and willing. Tim Drake, the detective who held the mantle together during Nightfall, believes he's the logical choice. Damian Wayne, Bruce's biological son, thinks birthright makes the decision obvious. And Dick Grayson, the first Robin, the one Bruce actually wanted, refuses. Gotham fractures. Black Mask's forces flood the streets. Jason adopts a violent, gun-wielding Batman persona that makes Azrael look restrained. Tim tries to prove Bruce is alive instead of taking the mantle. The city watches its protectors tear each other apart over a symbol. Battle for the cowl isn't subtle. It's Nightfall's succession crisis stripped of pretense, the thing Bruce feared most made literal. And this time, Dick Grayson knows exactly what's at stake because he watched it happen before. Dick takes the cowl, not because he wants it. Bruce knows he never wanted it, but because someone has to, and he's the only one who learned the right lessons. He watched Jean-Paul Valley try to become Bruce Wayne and destroy himself in the process. So Dick doesn't try to be Bruce. He's lighter, more acrobatic, trades the grim silence for actual communication. He takes Damian as Robin, the angry child who needs guidance, and builds a partnership instead of a hierarchy. He calls Oracle, asks the Bat family for help, operates as part of a network rather than a lone dark knight. And it works. Dick Grayson's Batman run from 2009 to 2011 is widely considered one of the character's best periods. He protects Gotham, mentors Damian, even earns Bruce's approval when he eventually returns. He succeeds precisely where Valley failed, by refusing to let the mantle consume his identity. But even his success is haunted by the question Bane forced everyone to answer. Can Batman last? Not the symbol, the man underneath. Dick proves you can wear the cowl without losing yourself, but only for 2 years before Bruce reclaims it. Valley proved you can break under the weight in months. Bruce himself has died, been broken, watched successors fall, and kept returning to a war that never ends. Nightfall introduced the idea that Batman might be an unsustainable burden, and 30 years of continuity haven't disproven it. Bruce ages, gets injured, loses partners. The Robins grow up and leave or die. Batgirl becomes Oracle, confined to a wheelchair. The Rogues Gallery never stops. Arkham's doors never stay closed, and Gotham never truly gets better. Every major Batman story since Nightfall wrestles with this in some form. The contingency plans, the successor arcs, the moments where Bruce questions whether he's helping or just perpetuating a cycle. Bane didn't just break Batman's back. He broke the illusion that this crusade has a winning endpoint. And decades of stories later, that question still doesn't have a comfortable answer. The Dark Knight Rises builds its entire third act around the break. Bane shatters Bruce in the pit, leaves him to watch Gotham burn from a cell. The Arkham games weave venom through their storylines. TN1 derivatives powering henchmen, while Bane himself becomes a tragic roided monster. Batman. The animated series never showed the break directly, but the threat was always there in Bane's design, the way he moved, the way Bruce tensed when he appeared. Every adaptation since 1993 knows the audience carries that image. You don't need to explain why this villain is different. You just show the size differential, the methodical violence, and viewers fill in the rest. The break becomes shorthand, a cultural trigger for Batman's mortality. It's why Bane appears in kids' cartoons as a gentle giant or a one-note brute, the edge sanded off, but the silhouette intact. Film students cite the prison pit sequence. Game designers build boss fights around exhaustion mechanics. Animators frame Bane from low angles, Batman from above, then reverse it. But the truest adaptation isn't on screen. Nightfall birthed the modern event comic template, the build-up arc, the shocking issue, the replacement hero, the long road back, the oversized sales spike. DC moved 663,000 copies of Batman number 400,000 was a hit. Marvel watched and launched the Clone Saga 2 years later. Image Comics' entire business model assumed you could ride shock value to launch weak dominance. The temporary status quo change became an industry standard. Kill Superman, replace him with 4 new versions. Shatter Captain America's shield, make Bucky the new Cap. Break Daredevil's will, let someone else wear the horns. Editorial meetings in the late 90s and 2000s all asked the same question: what's our Nightfall? The structure was so effective it calcified into formula. Big threat, old hero falls. New hero struggles, old hero returns. Sales graph looks like a bell curve. Nightfall proved you could change the main character and readers would follow, but only if they believed you'd undo it eventually. The illusion of permanent change became the product. 30 years of events have chased that same dragon, that same week where everyone had to know what happened. And at the center of all of it, one image everyone remembers. Bane stands in the sewers, knee raised, Batman's body draped across it, cowl torn, cape pooling on wet stone. One hand grips Batman's head, the other his ankle, and Bane just drops his knee. The crack echoes across 30 years of comic history. That single panel from Batman number 497 has been homaged in at least 40 different comics, parodied in cartoons, recreated in cosplay, tattooed on skin, painted on gallery walls. Artists reference the composition like Michelangelo's Pietà, the light source from above, Bane in shadow, Batman's broken form the focal point. It's been redrawn with Hulk and Wolverine, Doomsday and Superman, Thanos and Iron Man. The geometry of dominance, the body language of absolute defeat. Every reader who saw it in 1993 can still describe it from memory. The angle of Batman's spine, the way his head lolls, Bane's expression of cold satisfaction. It defines both characters in one frozen moment. Bane's tactical brilliance, his physical supremacy, his complete dismantling of the Batman myth, and Batman's vulnerability, the cost of the mission, the body that will fail him. No thought balloons, no caption boxes, just the image, the snap, the silence after. But what makes it iconic isn't just the brutality. It's the calculation behind it. Bane didn't just walk into the Batcave and fight. He spent 3 months studying every case file, every villain release, every patrol route. He knew Batman's psychology, his reflexes, the exact threshold where exhaustion turns to desperation. The Arkham breakout wasn't chaos. It was a stress test with 14 specific variables, each one designed to drain a different resource: physical stamina, emotional control, strategic focus. By the time Bane appeared, Batman had nothing left to calculate with. Joker breaks Batman emotionally. Riddler challenges him intellectually. But Bane did both, then added a third layer. He out-prepped the world's greatest detective. The break wasn't a fight scene. It was a checkmate 6 moves deep. And that's why, decades later, Bane's victory still feels earned. Nightfall works because it doesn't cheat. Batman isn't nerfed, isn't written stupid, isn't caught off guard by a lucky shot. He's operating at full capacity, making every correct tactical decision, and he still loses. The story respects his competence enough to show it wasn't enough. There's no kryptonite, no magic spell, no plot contrivance. Just a better plan executed by someone who understood that Batman's greatest strength is preparation. So Bane prepared harder. 6 months of intelligence gathering against 1 night of fighting. The math was always going to favor the patient one. It's the inversion that stings. Batman built his entire identity on being the one who plans, who knows his enemies better than they know themselves. Bane turned that doctrine into a weapon and used Batman's own methodology to dismantle him. The student became the teacher, and the lesson was brutal. It's the rare story where the hero loses, and it feels true. Joker has killed Robins, crippled Batgirls, terrorized Gotham for decades. But he's never won, not completely. Every scheme ends with him back in Arkham, the cycle resetting. Riddler leaves clues because he wants to be caught. Two-Face sabotages himself. They're all trapped in their own patterns. Bane broke the pattern. He didn't leave a riddle or a calling card or a thematic weakness. He walked into Wayne Manor, shattered Batman's spine in front of Alfred, and walked out the front door. No last-minute reversal, no escape clause. Gotham watched their protector fall and stay down. For 4 months, Bruce Wayne couldn't walk, couldn't fight, couldn't be Batman. That window, that absence, that's the victory Bane carved into history. He proved the myth was mortal, breakable, replaceable. Every villain after him has been chasing that same confirmation. But proving it came with a cost Bane didn't anticipate. Bane spent decades clawing his way out of a prison designed to break spirits, mastering 7 languages, forging his body into a weapon, studying every combat discipline the world had to offer. He orchestrated the largest jailbreak in Gotham's history, dismantled a criminal empire, and deduced the identity the GCPD couldn't crack in 10 years. None of it mattered after nightfall. Writers kept bringing him back, but every storyline circled the same drain. He'd scheme, he'd fight, he'd reference that one night, and readers would wait for him to do something half as significant. He never did. The man who proved Batman was mortal became the villain who couldn't prove anything else. Every appearance became a referendum on whether he could recapture that singular moment. Every defeat confirmed he couldn't. Bane's genius, his discipline, his decades of preparation, all of it compressed into one image, Batman's body draped over his knee. He wanted to break the legend. Instead, he became a footnote in it. And in the end, that might be the truest break of all. Nightfall doesn't end with the rematch in the Batcave. It doesn't end with Azrael's madness or Bane's exile to the island. It ends months later, with Bruce Wayne standing in the cave, his spine healed through Chandra Kinsolving's psychic touch and his own relentless physical therapy. The cowl sits on the table in front of him. He'd watched Jean-Paul Valley turn his symbol into something unrecognizable, watched Gotham's streets grow darker under a Batman who broke bones and ignored mercy. He'd seen what the city became when the myth twisted into something cruel. The break happened, the replacement failed, and now the choice sat in front of him, heavy and inevitable. Bruce picks up the cowl. He puts it on. He returns to Gotham, not because the city forgot he fell, but because it remembered. The legend didn't survive on invincibility. It survived on this, the man who got back up. Because that's the only ending the story could ever have. Bane proved Batman could be broken. Nightfall proved the break wasn't permanent. That's the shift. The myth stopped being about a man who never fell and became about a man who fell and climbed back out. Gotham saw the wheelchair, the replacement, the spiral. Then it saw Bruce Wayne walk back into the night. Every adaptation since has borrowed that framework. The Dark Knight Rises, Batman, Arkham Origins, dozens of comic arcs that put Bruce through physical or emotional collapse. They all end the same way, with the slow, painful return. The legend isn't the unbreakable vigilante. It's the one who breaks and refuses to stay broken. Bane gave Batman that story. He meant to end the myth and instead redefined it, turned it into something deeper and more human than the untouchable shadow Gotham feared for 50 years. The intelligence, the ruthlessness, the spine snapping over his knee, all of it forced Bruce to prove the one thing invincibility never could, that resilience matters more than perfection. And it's the legacy both men carry forward, bound together by the night Gotham's protector fell and the long road that followed. That's the truth Nightfall carved into the bedrock of every Batman story that followed. Heroes can lose, they can break, can fail, can lie bleeding in the dark, with nothing left but the choice to stay down or not. The break is never the end. It's the middle, the crucible, the moment that separates the symbol from the man and forces him to prove which one matters more. Bruce fell 500 feet into darkness, shattered his spine, lost his city, watched an imposter wear his cowl and nearly destroy everything he built. And he came back anyway, one agonizing step at a time, because recovery is what defines a hero, not invincibility. Bane gave Batman something no other villain ever could. Proof that the myth survives the breaking. That Gotham doesn't need a perfect protector. It needs one who gets back up. Bane studied Batman for months, dismantled his world piece by piece, freed every inmate in Arkham, and waited for exhaustion to do the work. Then he dragged Bruce Wayne into the cave beneath Wayne Manor and broke his spine over one knee, leaving Gotham without its guardian for the first time in years. Bruce crawled back from that fall, relearned to walk, fought his way home, reclaimed the cowl from a successor who'd lost himself in the role. He took his city back, not because he was unbreakable, but because he refused to stay broken. Gotham remembers the night Batman fell, but it remembers more clearly the morning he returned, slower and scarred, and still standing. Some wounds never fully heal. The vertebrae fused, the myth rebuilt on a foundation of pain and persistence. Neither does the symbol that rises above them. The city sleeps, the bat endures, and somewhere in the dark, both hero and villain carry the weight of what happened in that cave. the night Gotham's protector fell, and the long road that brought him home. If you want more deep dives into the shadows of Gotham, subscribe and let the city's stories find you.